people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans for justice. The people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, the people demand. Right to life and security. Oh, what a joy. Oh, what a peace. How great this country could be. Respecting your rights, respecting human rights. What a wonderful nation this could be. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica.
Welcome to another episode of Let's Start Justice, and we are still in Child's Month, and we continue to recognize the rights of children, but also how we can improve their safety and security. So the topic that we're going to be discussing today is violence in schools. But before we get into that, my name is Michael Jackson, Executive Director of Jamaicans for Justice.
And I'm Jade Williams, Policy and Advocacy Specialist at Jamaicans for Justice.
And we are joined by Mr. Richard Troop. He's the Acting Director of Safety and Security in the Ministry of Education and Youth. Thank you so much, Mr. Troop.
Good morning. Good morning.
All right, and we are also to be joined by Senator Damian Crawford, who is the opposition spokesperson on education and community development. I know ordinarily we would be going through the Human Rights Week that was, but we're going to have that discussion on the second half of the program. But Jade, I think you have some niceties to give away to the listeners.
Yes, I do. But first, I'll give them a little knowledge. So we do have our right of the day for today, and we are going through principles of child rights since we're in Child's Month. And one of the principles on which child rights is based is the principle of survival and development. And this essentially forms a part of the child's right to life, and it means that the child should not only have the right not to be killed, but to also have their economic and social rights guaranteed to the maximum extent possible. And that job would be for our government to ensure that there are mechanisms in place to fulfill those economic and social rights to the maximum extent that they can. Now, for our trivia question for today, this is the giveaway part. What does the PATH in PATH program stand for? I know a lot of us use the acronym PATH, and we have no idea what the PATH stands for. So you can respond to that on our Instagram. There will be a post up, or you can send a WhatsApp message to 2397583.
All right, so the topic for today, violence in schools, and we're discussing the approach that will be undertaken by the Ministry of Education. Now, for those who are paying attention to what is happening in Parliament, we heard from our Minister of Education, the Honorable Favour Williams, during her sectoral presentation on behalf of the ministry, that indicated that we have several challenges facing our students in schools, and it has become more pervasive in recent years. The minister during the sectoral presentation indicated that there were 55 critical incident reports which were received during the period January 2022 and January 2023, and those occurred at 50 different schools at varying levels. And at some point, we will ask Mr. Troop to indicate to us what exactly do we mean by these critical incident reports so we can have a sense of what is happening.
No, the categories of incidents ranged from gang-related incidents, physical assaults, robberies, break-ins. Some of the incidents were school bus accidents, sexual grooming, drowning, vandalism. So we're going across a wide range of serious and non-serious offenses. The presentation also outlined several driving factors that influence this violence that we're seeing, including home and community environment. And what seemed to have brought up a bit of traction in the news was the inclusion of violent music.
All right, so we heard the debate happening in the public space around what may contribute to the high levels of violence. And we are aware of some of the programs that are already in school, for example, the resource officers and so on. But we will leave that to Mr. Troop to outline for us. Senator Crawford is now on with us. Good morning, Senator.
Hi, good morning, guys. How are you?
We're good.
Good
Thank you
morning,
so much.
Senator.
And
Yeah,
Richard
man.
Troop is with us. Mr. Troop, let us start with you. If you could just outline to us what are some of the safety and security programs that are in schools responding to these critical incident reports. And before you answer the programs, Jade had outlined a wide range of issues, but what are the most critical in your estimation and what are the programs responding to those?
Thank you, Ms. Jackson, for accommodating this conversation this morning, and to Damian Williams and our dear listeners. Before I answer the question posed to me, I just want to put something in perspective for our listeners. The violence we're seeing in our schools cannot be addressed in a fulsome way if we're not also treating with the violence in our communities, in our families, and in our general society. What we are seeing in our schools is a reflection of a crisis that exists within the broader society. In response to the question asked, the Ministry of Education has been very deliberate to treat with incidents of school violence. I want to first acknowledge the fact that our annual budget, roughly $6 billion, is committed for the staff support within our schools, our deans of discipline, our guidance counselors, our HFLE teachers, and our school nurses. These are the student services group that respond to our nation's children outside the academic situation. And so that in itself is a significant spend by the government. We consistently remind our schools to ensure that we are creating the opportunity for the human resource that would have been provided by the system to give targeted attention to the students who need it the most. So what would be some of the intervention programs the Ministry of Education would have been pursuing in recent years to treat with school violence? And again, we are big on partnership in this context, recognizing that the school by itself, we will not achieve our targeted goals. So in response to partnership, we have a partnership with the Ministry of Justice, where we have brought restorative practices training in our schools. In the last academic year, over 9,000 educators, student leaders, and parents benefited from this 2-day intervention program. It is guided by an MOU. The MOU was revised in February of this year. From that partnership between the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Education and Youth, the restorative justice centers will be provided an expanded service to our nation's children. Children who are involved in violent situations can be referred to the restorative practice justice centers in close proximity to school or proximity to where our students live for a targeted intervention programs. We have been saying to our nation's schools, suspensions and expulsions by themselves are not tools that is going to resolve conflict situation that our boys and girls are in. So that is one area of support. We also provide, we partner with the Ministry of National Security, where for the 34 schools located within the 7 declared zones of special operation, located within or serving the 7 zones of special operation, we're giving targeted attention to those particular schools. Out of the partnership with the Ministry of National Security, one of the opportunities that is now available to these schools and to the resource, to the guidance counselors and deans and support staff within the 34 schools would be case management services provided to medium and high risk students. We have been suggesting to the system, Ms. Jackson, that part of our response must be targeted and clinical. We have to identify the medium and high risk students that are in our space and give targeted attention to those particular students in the context of our resource constraints. And so these are two of the interventions we have been having. You know that we have also relied on the procurement and availability of technology to support our schools. So all high schools have a working handheld metal detectors to help them to minimize the presence of weapons at our schools. 35 schools would have been retrofitted with walk-through metal detectors. We have invested significant resources in putting CCTV surveillance system in a number of our schools. This is a recognition that the technology does make a difference. And so again, we encourage our schools, especially schools that are better resourced, schools that have, for example, strong PTAs or strong past student association, that these are worthy devices, technological devices, to be made available to their schools that will make a big difference. So these are some of our
Continue,
strategies.
Mr. Troop, just a question because we need to bring in Mr. Crawford. The case management services that you mentioned, who is a part of that, what I would say, grouping to ensure that you have effective case management, psychosocial, and so on in corporate?
Excellent. So the process begins with data. So we would have asked our guidance counselors and deans of discipline to identify the medium and high risk students within the school population. We have actually given them a number. At the primary school level, we asked them to identify 20. At the high school level, we asked them to identify 50. These students are risk assessed using an instrument by the Ministry of National Security, an instrument that will have been developed under this CSJP program. The students are risk assessed using that instrument. We have a conversation with the parents for the consent for the students to be engaged in this intervention. The students are assigned a case manager who would work with them and the family. And in addition to the case management services, when we identify additional support that will be needed for our children, they are linked to the professional to provide that kind of continuity of work with the children and their families. This is just one of the type of intervention we have in our schools to treat with the issue of violence, school violence.
Thank you so much, Mr. Troop. Senator Crawford, I know you have a wide range of proposals, but based on what you see happening and some of what Mr. Troop had outlined, what is the parliamentary opposition's positions on some of these things, and what areas perhaps in your estimation need some improvement?
What Mr. Troop has outlined has raised in my own mind some questions, as is why it is not more effective and efficient, because some of what he has outlined are actually very good programs that, if implemented satisfactorily, should reap some results. So being that those programs are in train as it is, why is it that they have not attained more results? Because the counter assumption is that it would have been even more diverse situation had these programs not been in place. So one question that comes to mind, for example, is the
Dennis, I think you may be breaking up a little, or is it my internet?
Intervention to the 50 students. I'm here. Are you hearing me?
Yes, hearing you again.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. So I'm saying the intervention of the 50 students for intervention at the secondary level, is that available to all secondary schools? And so we can, on the program, how many have suggested their students, so that we can analyze the effectiveness and efficiency of the program. I believe that this program, however, these things can be implementation that we have recommended. Form teachers, persons who have applied to be form teachers, who are remunerated for their form teachers additional activity because placed on the rookies. They're not trained in ways of identifying problems in any special way than any other in working under the guidance counselors and the deans of discipline to know and
Senator Crawford, I'm gonna ask you to pause for a second. I'm having a challenge with your connection, so we're missing quite a bit of what you're saying.
But we are upon the break, so let's take the break and then we pick up.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans, by justice. The people's champion.
All right, welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We were having a little bit of a difficulty hearing Senator Crawford earlier, so I'm not sure if we're hearing again. Senator, are you with us? All right, Mr. Troop, just a quick
Yes.
question while we pick up with Senator. I quite like the case management process that you outlined. And I think my question to you, and you can advise if you're aware of it, the child diversion program, I'm interested to find out what synergies exist with those children who have not yet come in conflict with the law, but they have been identified as medium to high risk, whether it's two different set of programs. How do we have that type of synergy, given that the child diversion program is similarly well outlined, a well-oiled machinery based on my understanding? You have the probation officers working with the children, the child diversion officers working with the parents and the family to ensure that that social environment is fixed or being approached. What is the synergy between medium to high risk child diversion?
So you would understand and appreciate that the child diversion will then target a different category of students. These would have been students who would have committed, right, an act that would require that level of intervention. The program that we mentioned earlier, the partnership with the Ministry of Justice, with the restorative practices training, and with the victim services unit of the Ministry of Justice, is actually to reach the medium and high risk students who have not yet committed an act that would have required the child diversion program intervention. So they are very connected in the context that the restorative practices intervention and the recently signed MOU to provide psychosocial support and psychotherapy support to students who would have been involved in violent situations is to prevent those numbers going to the child diversion program. Yes. And so, yes, there is connected. I want to just make a point in response to Senator Crawford's earlier comment. And again, for our listeners to have an appreciation of something that I think is very critical. There is no silver bullet to resolving our problem of school violence. And also, colleagues, it is going to take a significant length of time. This is not a 9-day wonder. This is not something that is going to be fixed by tomorrow with one intervention. What is critical for us as a system, and I would always say to my guidance counselors or deans of discipline and HFLE teachers, we have to identify those particular milestones that would suggest that we are on the right trajectory of change. So, are our interventions reducing incidents of student infractions? Are they reducing the need for the utilization of suspensions and expulsions? And because of that, the ministry, within the last 2 weeks, have actually created a survey instrument, disseminated that to our schools so that we can have a greater appreciation of the number of students that were suspended, that were excluded, expelled, or those who would have voluntarily withdraw, so that we are using this data to actually track the impact of our program over time. Yes, so that is a
you know, one
critical,
of the
yes,
things, and Senator Crawford can respond as to not put in a precarious position here. But unfortunately, some of your schools are running rogue. They're not fulfilling and responding and adhering to the protocols regarding suspension and expulsion. So if you don't have a proper board and governance structure in place to ensure that the programs are therefore not only respecting children's due process rights, but when you have a child that is displaying certain maladaptive behaviors, why suspend them and send them back to the home environment that may very well be the cause? So I listened to the minister, and I think she mentioned that you'll be doing some modernization of the school board. I'm not sure that
yes,
is something you can speak to, or
yes.
if we should defer to Senator Crawford to respond.
Our minister did mention that in her budget, in her presentation, sectoral presentation in Parliament. It's very important that again we understand the complexity of this issue. We will have to look at our school board, the governance of our school, ensure that it is duly constituted. The requisite training support is provided for members of the board, because their role is critical to the effective and management of our schools. So our minister did make reference to that particular critical component of focus for the Ministry of Education, and that is deliberate, because we do recognize that if our boards are not strong, if they are not effective and robust, then that level of support in terms of governance would not be available to support our managers, our principals and middle managers to effectively manage our institutions. So that is critical.
Senator Crawford, we lost you for a second, but please pick up with the points that you were raising.
Yes, unfortunately, many of the things that are being discussed in the minister's presentation seem to be recently implemented, and by extension, sufficient time of the efficacy and the how much it's working with as a society. And what is accepted generally is that the situation is untenable, that is not satisfactory, and that more needs to be done. I believe, first of all, that enough is not in place, even for the boards to act appropriately, nor for the school management to act appropriately. For example, there's a particular need for separation of some of our persons, some of our students at the age of going to school, but not of the character to be in the same school as all the other students. Just this month, well, this is May, so last month, there was a report of a child who was expelled for stabbing from one school, went to another school in St. Mary, and again has been a perpetrator of a second stabbing. Why it is that we influence is what needs to be separated, because he's a part of a gang or he's participating in gang activity. That child suspension doesn't correct the malady that we're facing. Indeed, that child should be going to a boarding school, a separating system, to a special intervention school, so that the board can make proper decisions. The board is really faced with limited tools when we don't have the alternatives in place for them to use. But as I was saying earlier, I believe that better utilizing form teachers, better training them, so that the ratio of adult to student improves. We believe that the clubs and society up recently that the ministry is moving, in my opinion, hastily to have that extend the school, so that clubs and society become not just a a thing that a person volunteers for, but a mandatory thing for our students, because the problem has passed the simple spearfishing because it's systematic. The problem is so systematic now that we used to only say we have to talk to our boys, but our girls are now major perpetrators of violence against each other and participants in the violence within the schools. So it becoming more systematic, in my opinion, suggests that we need to move away from only spearfishing to more systematic interventions.
So, Senator, I don't know if you could give us an idea of what you have in mind, because as we were listening to the minister's presentation, and she pointed out a couple of the incidents that took place, like sexual grooming, attempted abductions. These are serious matters. So how do we holistically respond to it, in your opinion? Senator, I don't know if you're able to reconnect. I'm still struggling to hear you through the connection.
This is a very important term. Holistic research has identified.
I think we lost Senator. But Mr. Troop, there are two issues at play here,
Yes.
grappling with as a country. We have violence being perpetrated by the students themselves. And then you
Yes.
have being perpetrated against our children.
Yes.
It's a very precarious situation, that we have
It
as
is.
a
But I tell you again, Ms. Jackson, the violence we're seeing perpetrated in our schools is a reflection in the violence in our general society. And we have a society that is not really talking about this situation. Yes, you cannot fix the violence in our schools in isolation of addressing the violence in our community. So yes, look here. When children are exposed to violence in their home, school, and community, they come to us as hurting students. Hurting children will hurt other children. Yes? One of the things that we did a national assessment of the perception of school safety and security. And two glaring issues came out. A worrying concern about bullying and cyberbullying in our school. Yes, bullying and cyberbullying is at an alarming rate. We encourage our schools to treat with bullying and cyberbullying as a priority area of focus. Children who are on bullying and cyberbullying, it is not a high school phenomenon only. This is now also prevalent in our primary schools. If children are hurting children at the primary level and these issues are not resolved, then they come to us at the high school level with even more deeper concerns. Many of the children who are bullied today were once victims of bullying, in a part of their life. And so we want our schools to give targeted attention to the issue of bullying and cyberbullying. Bullying and cyberbullying foster things like extortion, because children would want to pay for protection. That is wrong. Yes. The other thing that is of concern to us too is that schools that are located in very volatile communities are more vulnerable to acts of violence being perpetrated at school. A lot of the communities locked in violence with established and active gangs will seep over into our schools. And so again, we're making the correlation between what is happening in our communities, what is happening in our schools. The other critical point I'd like to make, and it raised a bit of controversy within the general public, but I don't know if we can honestly say that when our students consume the type of violent music that now plays at ease, the kind of music that glorifies sex and drugs and scamming and back of the class and dunce and bleaching, if these messages are not influencing in a direct way the behavior of our students. And so when we have a conversation as if there is no connection, I find that very troubling, because when you see the kind of music that our students are listening to, not sometime, every single day, they listen to it at home, in their communities, as they traverse to and from school on public transport. And we are expecting our nation's children to behave differently when they come to school. Come on. There is a matter that we have to treat with.
I want
Yes,
us,
Jackson.
and if you don't mind, Senator, we have your back. I want us to pick up on that, because the challenge I have, because we have no issue with saying that our music, unfortunately, they glorify certain things and there perhaps is some connection. The issue is, does it have that kind of causal effect without acknowledging the other areas that we need to really tackle? That is the issue that I have, that comprehensive approach that is needed, rather than blame music and perhaps go to some wholesale ban. For a few minutes, we have to take the break for 2 minutes and then we pick up, please.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans, by justice. The people's champion.
Welcome back to Let's Start Justice. We were raising a critical component of the contributing factors to violence being displayed among our young people. And I know the issue of music as a contributing factor has been one of the main areas being discussed recently. Senator Crawford, let us pick up with you. We heard what Mr. Troop said, and he's very clear in the position from his own perspective that the music is a contributing factor, but that does not mean that we not recognize the other areas in society, like the lack of parental support, their and
I
so
don't depend on research for my hypotheses, but I depend on research for my conclusions. The research is clear. Violent media has no causal effect on violent action. The research is clear. Now, the research also indicates things that are of greater impact, as access to alcohol, for which government to reduce access to alcohol and drugs. That is a greater push factor towards violent activities. Scarcity and hunger. That's a greater push factor than music to violence and violent activities. Indeed, it has been indicated have cheer, don't have table, more fights than listening a song before you get to school. And that has not been corrected. That scarcity has not been corrected. Single parent experience. Jamaica have a 47% single parent experience, and the world is 17%. The United States said that they had a chronic situation with 21%. That single parent experience has been exaggerated by the income or the economic benefit of male not to participate himself and to get child support if he separates himself. The government has not intervened there. So therefore, consumption of violence as well cannot be reduced to music. What about violent movies? What about violent video games? What about violent comics? Indeed, it can extend it to violent literature books. I did a book in school called Macbeth. I will never be killed by a man not born of by a man born of a woman. More people died in chapter 1 than I have ever heard in any song. So the research exists, as much as we're passionate about it, that is not the major source of concern. There are greater sources of concern that should be identified and should be targeted. And it is not for defense of the music why I'm having this conversation. It is for finding the right solution. Because if you think music is the problem, then you're looking in the wrong places. You're looking in the wrong space. And when you look in the wrong space, you're going to find the wrong solution. So the research is clear that the causal effect. And I mean, look at the extensive, as you said, your son, my daughter, the extensive consumption of the music.
Mhm.
If there was a causal impact, which means majority outcome, that's one of the bases of causal impact, then 50 reported cases would have been way understated. If this is a causal impact, because there would have been almost total consumption and minuscule in relative to consumption violent activities. So there is no evidence in media has led to violent behavior, a contributing factor or a sufficiently
All right. We're going to have to leave it there, gentlemen, but I just want to have final word from each of you. Mr. Troop, we'll start with you and then we close out with Senator Crawford.
Yes.
How do we address this issue going forward?
I think I appreciate the fact that Senator Crawford did write to our honorable minister, identifying, recommending a number of possible strategies. I'm very sure that our minister would have responded. We welcome the contribution of all well-thinking Jamaicans. It is a national problem, and the solution lies with all of us working together, listening to each other. So we have to continue this dialogue. We have to continue to encourage our schools. What we would say, though, that, and I hear the call about separating some of our nation's children, especially those who are creating, for some persons, major havoc in schools. But then we separate them to what, right? And I think then an important, for me, conversation needs to be, if we intervene earlier, yes, in the lives of our boys and girls, if we pick up the warning signs earlier, and we would have created the support programs to change the behavior, we'll be in a better position. Yes, because expelling, suspending our students, sending them out of schools and not having a program or an institution to continue their education cannot be the solution either. Yes? So we just have to continue the dialogue and work together in order to address this societal crisis. It's a public health issue, and we have to see it as such, the violence we're seeing in our country.
Senator Crawford?
Yes, I agree that it is a societal, is a total, is an all hands on decks issue. I think that there are students, unfortunately, that we didn't intervene early enough, and they are where they are, and that means that we should have separation for intervention schools, or what we used to call reform schools, additional psychiatric help, additional discipline, additional environment for study, which the average school does not satisfy. And so expulsion from a school doesn't mean expulsion to nothingness if we had these possibilities. As I said, I would love to meet with the good minister or her team to have a discussion, because some of what I've heard today, how can we make it more efficient? How can we extend the benefits of it? Because they are programs to be recommended and programs to be extended, but maybe we can add one or two concepts to those programs to make them more efficient so that we can reduce the risk to our children.
All right, thank you so much. We really do appreciate your perspectives. That was Mr. Richard Troop, Acting Director of Safety and Security in the Ministry of Education, and Senator Damien Crawford, who is the opposition spokesperson on education and community development. Thank you so much, gentlemen, as usual.
You're welcome. Good.
All right, so to our listeners, it's a topic that we continue to speak about. And as we approach Child's Month and so on, I think we have to be looking at how we can collectively support. I'm not sure if you had the opportunity, Jade, from your end to listen to the Honorable Minister during her sectoral presentation, or if anything jumped up.
Yes, I listened to it. You know, I appreciate that the ministry seems to be taking seriously similar issues to what we would have identified, particularly that issue with the board and the ability of school boards to manage schools effectively and therefore ensure that those regulations coming from the ministry actually serve the purpose that they're intended to serve and allow the access to education that is necessary. So
Yeah.
I appreciated that aspect of it.
You know, it my disappointment though following
I
the
knew you'd come with the disappointments.
Yeah, I mean, you see, for those of us who have been paying keen attention to the issues tackling school governance is not a new phenomenon. It's not. I think it's an indictment on successive administrations not to have dealt with this issue comprehensively. When you see policies coming from the Ministry of Education that are more guidelines rather than prescriptive actions that schools must undertake, then you wonder is who really run things, the Ministry of Education or the principals that they have there. So that's a separate issue. When you see lack of administrative support to the degree that one would want, and you have the underlying issues that Senator Crawford and Minister Troop spoke of. Lack of nutritional support. Sometimes the food run out for poor people picnic, wherein
Yeah.
it only lasts 3 days. So when you have children on hungry belly, then it's no wonder that you're going to be having a low 60th percentile in terms of literacy and numeracy rate. How do you grapple and deal with those things effectively? When you talk about a lack of parental support, and then you hear about a 2-day training and so on, you ask yourself the question, are those trainings really reaching the parents who had needed this support to begin with? Because it's all, and then the PTA structure, when you go to a PTA meeting and then half of the meeting is focused on prayer and welcoming and so on, who has the time to leave work? These are some of the issues that we really do need to speak on. The last thing I want to point out, but we're upon the break. Let us take the break because I have something else to offer on this particular issue.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans, by justice. The people's champion.
Yes, we're back. You know, Jade, I was saying that there are some disappointments that I had or higher expectations because we've been grappling with these issues for a long time now. They're nothing new. I lost my train of thought a little, but one of the areas I felt more should have been probed from the media. And I thought we got caught up in let's blame the music approach because I agree that there is no study that says that this is the causal effect on music with actual children displaying or actually committing violent acts. So you have the music, some of them, quite frankly, you know, let me reserve my personal opinion there. But the reality is that whatever my personal opinion would be on this music, to say that this is why a child may beat up another child and so on, it lacks something. And the media got caught up in that. And for me, the great disappointment is that I don't think we got the detailed report of the Orlando Patterson report, the update. What are the implementation of, it's a couple 100 pages worth of report, you know,
Yes.
saying that this is how you're going to be dealing with issues at the early childhood education. This is how you're going to be rethinking how you put resources to the public education system, the nutrition support, how to address issues of literacy. Because if your mental space and your head space is one that allows for critical thinking, based on actual research now, it means that the likelihood of you committing a crime, a violent act, is going to be reduced. So how are you breaking the cycle? So I would have hoped and expected more in terms of this is the status of the Orlando Patterson report. We heard that there are some interventions that are working, that are underway, but I didn't get that detailed analysis coming out of the sectoral presentation. And I think it's an indictment on the media not to be asking those probing questions rather than us focusing weeks on whether or not music causes violence in schools. It's come on. But anyway, let us move on. We said that we would talk about the week that was.
Yes.
So there are two things coming out of the last week's cycle. One of which is that, let me start with the low-hanging fruit, if you will. One of which is that the parliamentary opposition has instructed its two representatives on the Constitutional Reform Committee not to sign the Constitutional Reform Committee's Phase 1 recommendation. Let me be very clear here. JFJ offers no opinion on whether or not the parliamentary opposition should or should not sign. What I want to outline to our listeners is what a referendum process entails. And a referendum process which will entail you, a voter, going and voting on whether or not we should remove the monarchy and become a republic is a part of the process. A critical part of the process of a referendum exercise, though, is that you need at least one parliamentary opposition member at the Senate level. Based on our parliamentary system, the two-third majority with the ruling party having 49 to the opposition having 14 means that they would have ease of passing a bill to say get rid of the monarchy. But when it comes to the Senate level, then obviously agreement is needed with at least one opposition member. And it is with that in mind, then obviously some consensus is needed. But let me be very clear here. As a Jamaican citizen and representing JFJ and Jade, you can feel free to jump in. This constitutional reform process ought not to be something that is negotiated between two political parties and a select few. And with the greatest of respect to the members on the Reform Committee, who some of whom I know to be people of integrity, they gave their effort at least 2 times per week. I'm hearing they were meeting. But what is problematic to me is that it's some sort of secret meeting. At one point, we're hearing that the members got a printed copy to review. Then at the end of the meeting, you give back the printed copy to the next meeting. It's what kind of secret business is happening with the country's business? Eh? So you, the Jamaican citizen, not only are you denied access to what these discussions entail, you don't have a clue. And this is no disrespect to the Jamaican citizens, because if we're not taught, we can't know. We don't know what the reform process entails, and we don't know what the implications of what we're going to be asked for in a referendum to vote on really consist of. So if I were to ask some people, how you want your president to be elected? Some may say, I make them vote for it in parliament, vote for that position. Some may say, I want to vote directly. If I ask what kind of powers the governor general have versus what you want this president to be, that's another question to be asked. If I ask if you want a non-executive president or a presidential system like the United States, the public is not at a consensus stage. And that is the problem we have. Where are the public hearings? Where's the Jamaica Information Service? That should be doing a much better job at public education. I'm not sure if you know these answers, the answers to these questions. Can guide me.
I most certainly do not know the answers, but I share your similar concerns. And from the get-go, as you mentioned, the public education, I have to latch on to that point, because that has been something that we have been very vocal on from the committee was named, that this has to be an integral part of the process. And I would argue that it has not seemed to take up the amount of importance that one would expect, considering that we should be using this public education process to prepare our citizens to participate in a referendum process. And I'm very concerned with the trajectory between preparation of report versus where we are with public education and the country's understanding of constitutional reform. As you know, we've been engaging with the public quite heavily in our community and school interventions, and even the knowledge of the process is more limited than one would expect for something that is going to have such an impact on our governance. So I'm quite concerned. But
quite concerned, let me say frankly, what the government is undertaking is an anti-democratic exercise. It's anti-democratic because the people have no say in what has taken shape so far. It's anti-democratic because to date, we have not gotten a firm answer from the Ministry of Legal and Constitutional Affairs whether or not this bill, once it has been drafted, would be subjected to a joint select committee. It's anti-democratic because from the get-go, you had two cabinet ministers, including the Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs herself, saying that some matters won't be discussed at all during the reform process. It's an anti-democratic exercise, and I would hope that they course correct forthwith and fix it. I will also make very strong recommendations to the ministry here to say that there ought to be, which we had written to them last year, a non-binding survey taking shape to get a sense of what the Jamaican people know and why they have a particular feeling towards some of the areas that are up for discussion. What you know about the presidential versus non-presidential system, why you feel that particular way. What you know about the Privy Council versus the Caribbean Court of Justice, why you feel a particular way. And then you have public education on it. And that cannot be done before the next election date, which quite frankly, the Constitution itself ought not to be tethered to that. Yeah, which becomes constitutionally due the general election, September 2025. So my question is, what will happen between now and then? It's an anti-democratic process, and I think we ought to fix it. The second thing, Jade, if you would allow me, that I want to touch quickly on, because we have just about 5 minutes left. Last week, we heard from the good Lloyd Reid, the president of the Privy Council. And quite frankly, as a sovereign country, I would like to hear less from Lloyd Reid,
Yes.
as respectful as I can put it. I don't want to hear from our colonizers of the past on matters of Jamaica's sovereignty and how we are to be governed from the legal standpoint of the judiciary. It's an independent branch and we're a sovereign country. But last week we got some report that there is going to be what is now called a merit rule. And I heard the good minister, the Honorable Delroy Chuck, saying that what the Privy Council is doing is just makes sense, you know? That's the minister's standpoint. So for the listeners who are not aware, and you would allow me to try and be brief in this, you have a constitutional right to appeal in Jamaica. You have the 5 court levels. When the lower courts make a decision, the higher courts, based on our constitution and based on some of the statutory laws that are governed, for example, parish court, Supreme Court, and so on, it's very clear that if one of the lower courts make a decision that you're not happy with, then constitutionally, you can seek the opinion of the higher court. The Privy Council is now saying that they're going to have a single judge from their end if a matter is approved by our Court of Appeal to go to the Privy Council. A single judge from the Privy Council can look at a document and say, you know what, I don't think it reached certain threshold. You're denied access of having your right to appeal. If you have a challenge with that, you appeal that single judge's opinion or decision. And then now 3 judges from the Privy Council will look at a written document now and say yes or no. So you don't have an opportunity to go and argue your case. But let me be very clear. Section 110 of the Jamaica's Constitution does 3 things, or 2 things rather. It establishes your right to appeal to the Privy Council as our 5th and final court. But within Section 110, it already has some threshold that must be met. So some weeding out process is already taking shape based on our own systems. And it says, for example, you have the right of appeal in certain matters. We don't have the time to fully go through it. But in other words, if it is that your case has a certain dollar value, or if it is a matter of great public interest, you have the right to go to the Privy Council. If the Court of Appeal turn it down, you have what you call a special grant of leave that you can go to. The challenge here is that the decision taken by the Privy Council, they can fix them procedures at their will. But in fixing their procedures, they can't have implication for your constitution as a supreme country. So in other words, a decision was taken by an external body that will have implications for your constitution. Critical here is the governance issue. We had no say in that decision that was taken. No say. Who was a part of that consultation? The Jamaica Bar Association said it was not. Civil society was not. The Minister of Justice needs to come out and say if he or his ministry or if his counterparts were. If I missed it, my apologies to the listeners. And if there was no other time to go to your Caribbean Court of Justice, this is the time. A decision taken by external parties, a country, and their system is undermining your constitutional rights to appeal, and you had no say in that. I want that to soak in, and next week we'll try and explain it a little bit more when time allows. Jay, do you have your winners, or if anything you want to close, or we have just about 2 minutes?
Yeah, no, I don't have any winners quite yet. Our winners will be announced on Instagram because we are pre-recording our show, but the post will be posted in real time as the show is airing. However, you know, I think it's really poignant, the point that you just made, Mikhail, because I think in the discussions about constitutional reform, when we even made our recommendations to say we should be considering this issue of the final court as a major part of whatever first initial conversations we're having, that must be a part of that initial conversation, because this is the implication. We're talking about removal of the monarchy while we have this system of the Privy Council in place with no discussion about removing it, that has this amount of sway over our access to justice here in the country. So, and you know, as you were even discussing the process, I just want to say quickly that it is even more cumbersome for a person appealing from here, because it's already cumbersome now, having to go through all the procedures you have to go through. But with now possibly being denied, then having to appeal that denial before you're even able to try your matter is extreme.
The language, who's going to be paying for it? If you have the money, you let me know. I don't.
It's certainly not.
Together all of those attorney fees. But that's where we have to leave it. Thank you so much for joining Let's Start Justice. And we will see you next week, and we will have some updates at that point regarding the future of the show. So stay tuned. Have a good week. My name is Mikhail Jackson.
And I'm Jay Williams.
Jamaicans, for justice, the people's champion, Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention and police brutalization. Class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination.
To join the fight against injustice, contact us at 755-4524 or Jamaicans4Justice.org.
The people's champion.